welcome everybody to this month's National Conversation Fire Behavior Analyst Panel, where we've asked 3 fire behavior analysts from across the country what factor related to fire behavior is keeping you up at night. You can see our 3 panelists on the slide there, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But first, I'm just going to go over the format of this conversation. So the first panelist will be given 5 minutes to introduce their topic, and then the 3 panelists will be given 10 minutes to discuss amongst themselves. And we're going to repeat that for each of the panelists. And then with whatever time we've got left at the end, we're going to open it up to discussion with the audience. So with that, I'll just give a brief bio of each of our panelists. So we've got Tanya Letcher, who is the Provincial Fire Behavior Specialist at the Alberta Wildfire Coordination Centre in Edmonton, and fills the role of FBAN on one of the provincial incident management teams. As a fire practitioner for more than 20 years, Letcher has also worked as a wildfire management specialist in Lac-La-Biche, as a wildfire training specialist at the Hinton Training Centre, and as a Parks Canada Fire Management Officer in both Jasper and Wood Buffalo National Parks. We've also got Normand Lecour. Normand is the base manager in the west area of the Northern Modified Response Zone for CIFFC, a non-profits organization who acts as Quebec's wildfire management agency. Normand received his force management technician diploma in 1992 at Rouyn-Noranda. He started in 1989 as a seasonal flying observer for wildfire detection. He was hired as a wildfire technician in 1996 and attended the Advanced Wildfire Behavior in Fredericton that fall, followed by the Wildfire Behavior Specialist course in 1997 in Hinton. And Normand has been involved in the French version of the Advanced Wildfire Behavior translation and delivery since '98, and the Wildfire Behavior Specialist course since 2008. And finally, we've got Matthew Johnson. Matthew is a fire management officer at Terra Nova National Park. He graduated in 2007 from Lakehead University with an honors Bachelor of Sciences degree in forestry, 15 seasons involved in wildfire with both the Government of Alberta in the Calgary and High Level offices, and then with Parks Canada at Grasslands, Cape Breton, Highlands, and now Terra Nova. I served many roles in a variety of functions: division supervisor, heavy equipment group supervisor, supply unit leader, currently now filling the role of fire behavior analyst over the last 6 seasons with Parks Canada. Some fires of note that he's been an FBAN on include the 2017 Kenow wildfire in Waterton Lakes National Park, the 2018 Wardle Fire in Kootenay National Park, and the 2021 Lytton Creek Complex in BC. In his spare time, he likes going hiking, camping, and spending time with his family at the newly purchased home-based hobby orchard. And so, without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our first panelist, Tanya Letcher, to introduce her topic, and then we'll go into the conversations. I'll also introduce Kelsey Gibbos, who's going to be helping me co-moderate this session and with the conversation side of things. So with that, Tanya, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. When Matt posed the question, what keeps me up at night, I kind of had a hard time deciding what that is, because there's a lot going on in the fire behavior field. And I guess I should preface this by, I don't have slides, I don't have a presentation. It was going to be a 5-minute introduction to the topic, so I thought we would really treat it as a conversation. And so what I sort of landed on is, if I leave the weather forecasting to the meteorologists, they do their thing, then what's actually in my control? So if I'm thinking of the upcoming fire season, it's fuels. Getting the fuels right is kind of what keeps me up at night, because that's kind of on my shoulders as the FBAN. So what do you do if your fuels don't fit into one of the 16 FBP fuel types? Take, for example, what do you do if you have a sparse, stunted pine stand that's got light scattered, deadened down fuels and a Caledonia ground cover? Like, how do you classify that, right? That was an example of one of the field calls that we had to make on the Horse River fire in 2016. And so selected C1 or spruce lichen woodland as our fuel type, assuming that Caledonia was the defining characteristic. So it comes down to being able to use your judgment and your experience as an FBAN to select the best fit. So now in that instance, it was a best fit based on stand structure, but you can also do your best fit based on fire behavior observations. But the idea there is it's a qualitative visual assessment, right? So it's our pine stand became a spruce stand, or in another instance on another fire, we had, it was a spruce stand, but it wasn't behaving as a true black spruce or boreal spruce. So the field call was, we're going to treat it as an rates of spread as 80% of that fuel type. So we adjusted the outputs using a standard fuel type. So there's a lot of different ways that you can manipulate the 16 fuel types, but that's sort of out of the scope of the Red Book. So you're kind of hanging yourself out there. So it means you really have to have a good understanding of the research, the current research that's out there. And you also have to have a little bit of real world experience. So you have to be able to say, have I seen that before? Have I talked to another FBAN who's seen that before? And probably the biggest thing is being able to document those decisions. Why did you make that call? Because if things ever go sideways, and they almost always do, you got to be able to have a rationale for why you did what you did. So I guess when fuel typing becomes more art than science, that sort of keeps me up at night. So with that, and I guess I might have not entirely understood. I thought at this point, after introducing the topic, it would be open to questions from everybody, because I'd actually had a list of some things that we struggle with when we talk about fuel typing, and I was curious from the audience or from the panel how you've dealt with these things. Like there are fixes that are out there, but have you come across or dealt with things in a different way? So, you know, if you talk about fuel treatments, we're all about fire smart. So what are we doing when we are pruning, thinning, getting rid of the deadened down fuels? So are we calling, I know in Alberta, we call that a C6, because that sort of allows us to play with the crown base heights a little bit. But is that a good fit? You know, I'd be curious what other agencies are doing. Or, you know, how do you deal with treed muskeg, where water table can really have a huge impact in terms of, is it going to burn or isn't it? And then we have, at least in Western Canada, and BC's probably dealt with this the longest, is forest insects and diseases, specifically mountain pine beetle. Again, knowing the research and what BC did, they came up with, you know, the mixed wood dead fir to deal with the initial stages of red attack in mountain pine beetle stands. So there's lots of things that people are doing, but again, in that instance, that's based on research, and other times you're just making a call. And so I'd be curious, like, go. what do folks think about, you know, like that's the thing for me. I'd be curious if that resonates with anyone else.
Sure. So yeah, we'll pass that question first over to the other two panelists. But while this discussion is happening, if anyone wants to post a comment or question to the chat, feel free to do so. But yeah, Matthew and Norma, and any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll go first there. No, absolutely, Tanya. That's a great question. We're seeing it more and more across Canada, where those 16 fuel types don't necessarily fit what we're seeing out in the field. And what I've experienced over the last couple of years is definitely relying on, you know, what other agencies are doing, or how they're classifying their fires. You know, I don't want to delve into my presentation too much, but you know, for the Kenow fire, it was a dominant C3 fuel type just by looking at it, but it was behaving like a C2, so not quite out of the 16 fuel type realm, but it was a different fuel type acting like a different fuel type. And Yeah, it's challenging, and a lot of times you do have to go with your gut. And with a treed muskeg, just with my experience up in northern Alberta, you're absolutely right. That's a whole other gamut of wildfires that you're going to see on the landscape. They are going to behave differently than what you're going to predict. So having those field observations, getting out into the field is definitely important. Conversing with those other F bands like you mentioned and I've mentioned, and then just seeing what the fire is doing from one day to the next. And it's a tough question to have a precise, consistent answer because it is so different out there. And we are seeing it change almost season to season with respect, even though fuels are fairly continuous. Um, there are changes happening at very quick rates between seasons or over, a very small amount of time within a 5-season period.
Normand?
Yeah, I think it's the hardest part of the job to identify what type of fuel we're going to have. We have actually, if we don't have a chance to see it burning, holy, we're in deep trouble. But we have to remember what has been taught to us. We have to identify what kind of fuel or what is the amount of fuel, disposal of the fuel that will sustain a surface fire. Everything starts from there. So we have to make sure that we can see it. We have to touch it, even kick that off. You have to go in the field to have a better idea. And also, I learned recently, a couple of years ago, if you can identify what is the fuel treatment or forestry treatment occur there, or what is the perturbation, I don't know how to say that in English, lead to the actual fuel stand. With that knowledge, it's gonna help you to find what fuel type we have to use in your FVP.
I know that, like, just to touch on some of the things, I mentioned that in Alberta, we treat, and they're not big areas, but are currently classifying our fuel treatment areas or forest areas as plantation fuels, or C6. We talked about the research from BC. They're using, or they have used, that M3 65% dead fir content if it's, up to 5 years and 50% mortality. The treed muskeg, Dan Thompson has actually done a paper, and depending on what the drought is, low, moderate, and severe, it's anything from a D1 right up to a C2. Again, depending on, and it's dealing strictly with peatlands. Let's see, what are some of the other ones? I guess when I think about some of the other tricky ones, like even last year going to BC on the Cascades complex, we had a lot of regen in the fire area. And so what we were finding, well, as it happens, whenever I show up at a fire, it starts to rain or the fire dies. So I sometimes have to rely on what the people around me have seen before I got there, or what they've seen in similar landscapes in those years. So as an example, we had a lot of regen, and it was so immature pine, but there was a lot of deciduous shrubby stuff in the undergrowth. And so what the F bands from BC who were from that region had said is, okay, we think it's going to burn, or it has shown us to burn. It's going to burn like an M2 10% conifer. So even though it was a young conifer stand, there was so much in the understory that they were saying, well, no, it's mostly deciduous. So, and again, there are qualifiers. It's like if the regen is less than 15 years old, if the winds are less than 20. But again, it's like, I really like sharing those things amongst different folks. So again, I'm not going to create a rule for every regen is going to behave like this, but it's nice to have those mental pictures in the back of your head. So it's like, have I seen this before? Have I talked to somebody about this before? Because it's all well and good to say that it's based on your experience, but sometimes you don't have that experience because you haven't seen it before. So it's these national conversations, I think, are really important in terms of being able to share that sort of information.
Yeah, good points, Tanya. I wanted to touch on one of the other things you spoke about in your introduction. You mentioned an important part was just recording the decisions you made and why. And I think that's important for a few reasons, not just so you can justify the decisions you made later if you ever get questioned on them, but I think clarifying those sorts of things helps people understand your thought process. So it might help them better understand why you're thinking along those lines, and maybe help them understand why they may be seeing the behavior they're seeing when they're out there.
Mm.
We also got a comment in the chat from Michel Thoreau. He's saying, no real answer comment, more of a suggestion about the need for building a national database of various situations and how they have been approached, what fuel has been used or how it's been modified, and really important, how it burned, and did it fit with the solution used? Did it match? And if not, why? And this is something that should probably be hosted on the CIFFC website so all FBANs can share that experience. I think that's a really good point. And he followed up, the database should have the capability to include photos and even better videos associated with the case studies. So yeah, that's some great discussion there. Any more points? We've got another 2 minutes we could spend before we move on to the next topic, if anyone had any other thoughts.
Actually, I just wanted to draw attention to Greg Walker's comment in the next gen CFF-DRS. Like there's some really exciting stuff there where we can start to play around with some of the elements of the stand structure to better represent what we're seeing. So that's actually super exciting.
Yeah,
thanks, Tanya. And I'd just say that's not too far off either. So maybe this seems like a plug for the next national conversation, but you know, if you're interested in any of those things, tune into that, because some of these pieces in the next gen danger rating system are very close to being ready, at least for initial use.
Yeah, that's right. And that presentation will be happening April 27th for those who may or may not have heard that yet. Okay, thanks everyone. With that, I'll pass it over to Normand to introduce his topic. Oh, you're muted.
Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yep, all good.
Okay. Thanks, Matt, to ask me to be here. It's a great honor you did to me. And I'm happy to share with you. When you asked me that question, what keeps me up at night, I remember all the nightmare I did.
Oh, you seem to have muted again.
Is it okay?
Yeah, good now.
Okay, my recurring nightmare is usually in January, February. I just did it a couple of weeks ago. It's a fire behavior faster and more intense than forecasted. I did it in my dream, and then fuck, what's happened there? I mean, a fire behavior over the limit of predictive tool, then not being able to anticipate the unexpectable. Couple lyrics, welcome to my nightmare. I think you're gonna have a thrill. I think you're gonna feel you belong. I think it's happened to a lot of people to be unsafe or stressed by the fire behavior prediction we're doing. All the tools have some limits. and we have to know them to make our fire behavior prediction. And it gives us some clue where the shit gonna hit the fan. Like Tanya said, the fuel conditions are not always and not often similar to the FVP system. The fuel moisture codes are good at the weather station, but at 10, 20, 40 kilometers, it might be different. Fuel are not uniform and continuous usually in the forest. We have also the firebrand effect. So there's a lot of entrant inputs that leads to not good fire behavior or not accurate fire behavior prediction. When you're doing your fire behavior prediction, you have to identify what is your confidence level on your forecast. And it's influenced by a lot of entrant, like the weather, the fuel, topography. This is the triangle, but we have to add in there the human factors, like what experience you have, how many days you see that fire burning. If you just arrive, or it makes 10 days you 10 days you following that fires, it's easier. It become you have some local knowledge. Is it in where you work often, or somewhere it's your first time you're going there? What about what are the limits of the fire behavior model you're using, and how the amount of fatigue you have to face? Are you vigorous or you're facing fatigue? All of those factors influence your quality of your fire behavior prediction. Like we use different model to identify our confidence model. Like that one, it uses the fire triangle. Most of you know them. So you have the weather, topography effect, and the fuel. But there's no human factor in there. There's another model we had to the fire behavior triangle. The confidence or does it fit with the fire behavior model? Which one do you use? How confident are you with that? But we still don't have human factor in there. I have a proposal model that use not the fire triangle, but the fire behavior triangle with topography, weather, forest, fuel, and the fire behavior model, but we have to use or add some of human factor. Are you facing fatigue, or you're vigorous? You have experience in that place, that area, and you have some local knowledge, you have access of it, and we can add some. What is missing? Local knowledge, experience, vigor. Anyway, we have to add some human factor in our confidence model, and then try to figure out how can I can I forecast if we're going to have a convection column driven fire? Is there some topography effect on that fire? I think last summer in BC, they saw all of those traps, like low level jet stream, some funnel. We saw some very, very full of fuel ready to burn in some area. So there's a lot of fire. They had some unexpected fire behavior. It was horrifying there. It's not easy, and it keeps me awake long hours to make sure that I take in account that part of I have to talk with someone, and it keeps me awake. I don't want to face something that I don't forecast. I didn't imagine it can happen. The thing is and it happens before, but without consequences. But I'm always afraid to forget something. This is my nightmare. What about you, folks?
Yeah, thanks, Normand. I'll pass it over to the other panelists for their comments on that.
No, you're absolutely right. Like when you think about the FBP system and the Red Book, there are some pretty inherent like there's some pretty big assumptions in there, and so we're already starting off with kind of a shaky foot. And when you consider that our forecast, our fire behavior forecast, is usually based on a weather forecast, so again we're sort of compounding those not errors, but those places for that error can happen. It's yeah, it's a bit of a thing, and it's like even when you think about the assumptions, like those assumptions are pretty big, right? Like unidirectional wind, uniform and continuous fuels, simple topography. It's like I don't think I've ever been on a fire that had those conditions. So it's yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's a challenge. How do you, and I mean there's that disclaimer in the Red Book, it's like plus or minus 20%, but 20% is quite a lot. So yeah, no, it's certainly, yeah, no, I've certainly felt it's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure with what I know, this is what's going to happen. But there's also a like, yeah, it's like I'm only mostly sure. Well, I'm as sure as I can be given the factors that I have at my disposal.
Yeah, thanks for that, Normand and Tanya there. Absolutely, that Red Book, those general assumptions, I mean, they are very broad in scope, and very minimal in application, because as you mentioned there, Tanya, that you know there's fires with multiple assumptions on them, and a lot of those assumptions don't fit. It definitely concerns me that you know the Red Book and you know the fire triangle doesn't take into account that human factor as well. We are seeing, you know, more active fire behavior, longer periods of the day. So that fatigue, not just on day one, but multiple days in a row of day, you know, 10 through 14 is you know, it starts to become difficult for the F-band to continue to make you know the best prediction possible. Or if you've had a lull in a fire and all of a sudden your fire behavior is picking up again, you know, it's changing what your predictions are going to be based on the field observations. So no, good, definitely good question there, Normand.
I think
Like
that, oh, I was just going to say, I think the one thing that we sometimes fail to do is we're so busy forecasting and we're thinking about tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, that sometimes we don't make time to go back and validate. So, okay, I said it was going to go 10 meters per minute and it went 20 or it went 2. Like, why did that happen? Was it because the wind was different? Was it because I got the fuel type wrong? What was it that can account for that difference, so that when I do my forecast for tomorrow, I've tried to correct whatever that error might have been. So I think that's when we talk about forecasting, that's the one thing that we always have to make sure that we're doing, is we're also looking back, and like that validation is kind of clutch.
Mm-hmm. And when we are facing a new place, like when you go out of province, it takes sometimes 10 days to be very accurate. So as soon as you're confident in your fire behavior, you have to go. And I remember my first very bad fire behavior prediction I did. I forgot forget to take account in the overnight RH recovery. In Eastern Canada, it doesn't happen often. We can see it often with the Chinook in the west, but in Quebec we don't have Chinook in Ontario neither. And the other thing, you talk about the 20% of accuracy. You have to remember we have to overestimate, not underestimate that 20%. And we have to be under that 20% and as close as possible, but don't take any chance. Because if you are always 30, 40, 50% over, people's manager will notice it. And they're going to figure you are crying at the wolf. So every time you're going to make a fire behavior prediction, they will take your numbers down. And this is very dangerous.
Mhm. No, I think it's when briefing, I think it's like, I always argue against the worst case scenario. I think it's nice to introduce it as in terms of what's probable or what's possible, but always forecast for what's probable to your point, to avoid that idea of always seeming to cry wolf. Because then people just stop listening to you.
Mm-hmm. That's why we have to introduce the human factor in our confidence model. And it can show you where you can upgrade or have a better fire behavior prediction, because you can see where you can fail. So if bad outcomes occur, you have to be able to point before it happens where you have a lack in your fire behavior prediction.
Yep, good points. We got a comment from Ezekiel McLeod in the comments saying, a valuable human factors chart. Is there an FBAN standard operating procedure template or checklist to limit the details forgotten? I remember some conversation on that checklist tool during Module A of the specialist course.
Actually, there's none.
Yeah, I don't think there is one that exists. But
Kelsey, is there one?
We have those decision-making traps. That's a human factors chart that we sort of touched on a little bit, I think, in Module A. And I used to print out the little pocket cards. I think I still have mine in my red book about the 10, I think it's 10 decision traps that you can fall into. Ezekiel, maybe we can pass those along to you if you haven't seen those, or if they got pulled out of Module A or not. But yeah, good comment.
It's in Model B.
Thanks. And yeah, another factor that can confound your fire behavior predictions is just the fact that most times you're doing fire behavior predictions, it's on a fire that's being actively managed, and those suppression effects can significantly impact your fire behavior predictions. Thanks. I think that's the time we've got for that topic. So I think we'll move over to Matthew Johnson now to introduce his topic.
Perfect. Can everybody see that full slide?
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. All right, yep. So thanks for the introduction prior to these discussions. I'm a fire management officer at Terranova National Park. So the question that kind of keeps me up at night and the factor, related to fire behavior is, it's this increased fire behavior into the evening and overnight periods. Recent fires have kind of gone above and beyond what our normal burning period is. And a lot of times the most active fire behavior has been seen into the not even early evenings, but late evenings and overnight periods. We are seeing that increase in prolonged periods of drought throughout fire seasons. You're seeing those elevated temperatures stay elevated. The relative humidity is remaining low, and the winds staying higher, even increasing into those evening periods. We're not getting any of that overnight recovery that we typically had historically observed on these fires. You know, and those elevated temperatures, those lower H's and those winds are definitely leading to that increased volatile fire behavior. And not only is it being forecast that way, but it is actually being observed on many of these fires of note in recent years. So the fuel type, what I'm also seeing kind of related to that extreme fire behavior into those evening periods is because it has been so dry, and without touching upon it too much again, because Tanya's presentation kind of hit on it. You know, it's reclassifying the fuel type that you're going to make your predictions on. You know, you could be, like I said, in a C3 fuel type, but you're using C2 values because it's indicative of the fire behavior being observed. You know, it's an eye opener to have to use that and to use that because the traditional modeling was ineffective to predict what the fire behavior was going to be on the field validated fuel types. So I'll more specifically talk about the Keno fire, and I just want to draw your attention to kind of these 4-hour period between 9 and 1 in the morning, essentially. You know, it had been hot and dry all season, as many people were aware of that 2017 season. And, you know, we had a very volatile fire situation here in Waterton Lakes National Park for Parks Canada, and then eventually into the province of Alberta. You know, we had those high wind speeds during that overnight period. We weren't getting really any RH recovery. And then, you know, we had our FWI values, you know, essentially the highest values during that day were in the nighttime period. And this isn't, you know, this isn't a standalone fire. We're seeing it on fires kind of more recently in the past few seasons where there's been an active fire season. You know, we're seeing that intensity class 6 at night. We are seeing these increased fire conditions, and you know how it relates to kind of, for me, staying up at night. It's, you know, I'm plugging in these numbers, I'm making these predictions, and field observations are, you know, more often than not holding true, and it's just it's honestly, it's scary to see this kind of stuff happen throughout a burning day. So, like, some takeaways that I've gained, you know, from making these predictions and you know, what I try to employ and what I always think about. You know, it's always that those dry prolonged periods. You know, you're going to see that volatile fire behavior. Hopefully it's not going to happen, but more likely often than not will. Getting out in the field, it's confirming your predictions with field observations, whether that's you as the FBAN getting out in the field and seeing the fire behavior from hitching a ride on an ops machine or some other machine if it's available, getting out, walking, seeing how deep the fire is burning. You know, those are all very important skills that, as an FBAN, you shouldn't forget. It's not just about sitting behind a computer and making those predictions. Or if you can't get out in the field, you know, if it's an overnight period of burn, if your fire is using overnight resources, asking them to make some notes on some fire behavior that they observed, and going back and seeing if your predictions were accurate. You know, it also, don't second guess the numbers. You know, if they are extreme, they're extreme for a reason. You know, it's just never try to second guess yourself, but you know, you want to make the most probable fire prediction that you can. You know, and is this a new norm for Canada? And you know, it very well could be. You know, the climate change is occurring. We are seeing more and more fires of note, or for extreme fire behavior seasons. You know, this is just a short list of kind of fires of note across Canada, or wildfire seasons of note. You know, on many of these fires or many of these seasons, you've seen fires burning earlier in the day as things heat up and ramp up throughout the season, or into those overnight periods. It's you know, we're seeing temperatures, we're seeing RHs be at their maximums that have been ever reported, and then in one season, and then the next season, those records are broken. And then a couple of seasons down the line, those records are broken yet again. So it's being adaptable. It's knowing that the predictions you're making are key to help with different management objectives on the fire. And it's just trusting yourself and getting out in the field is kind of how I look at, you know, making sure we're doing everything we can in the fire prediction game.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. I'll pass it over to our other panelists to comment on nighttime fire behavior.
Yeah, no, I guess this sort of, I don't know for anyone on this call that was at Mike Flanagan's presentation yesterday where he was talking about wildfires and climate change, and he had sort of suggested that, you know, we're looking at this new reality. And so he talked about, you know, increasing temperatures, increasing FWI trends, increasing ISI trends. And yeah, it's like what these extreme events are just, the frequency is becoming both within a season and when you look across a decade are getting to be, yeah, a very real part of the way we do business now. Yeah, there's, sorry, I did like, okay, that's, I'm done.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to always be ready to adapt our art with the climate change. It is the biggest challenge I think we're gonna have, and be able to identify this is an unusual season. If we can see it, then we can, before it happens, then we can anticipate the bad outcomes. If you were not able to identify, oh, this is not a regular season, it's a very different, we have to adapt our heart to what we are going to face.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Norma. And if you can sort of identify those indicators that tell you that there's something different about this fire season, it can help prepare you for how the things may change from what you're normally expecting. But if you're not sort of conscious of those indicators, you'll just be caught by surprise. We had a question from Mark Hill for Matthew. Was there a cold frontal passage during the time circled when you're showing your indices in your presentation?
Yes, there was, which, you know, cold front passage with those indices, that fire, that time of night led to the results of that fire, absolutely.
So if, sorry, Kelsey, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's some comments in the chat that look like they should be followed up after the national conversation. So some ideas. Kate here has been talked about, you know, the human factors we mentioned and this case study database. Where do we go from here? So I don't know, Maria, if we can take that forward to the CIFFC Science Committee, perhaps to work with the chair of the Fire Behavior Specialist course or wherever you think the best place to find this information would be. I mean, we've all been talking about it for a long time. it would be nice to see some leadership somewhere to move that forward. Is there any ideas on how some of the things we talked about today, where it goes from here?
Yeah, so we have heard this come up from time to time. Hopefully, I think I'm freezing. I know the US has some incredible resources. Mark Hale just sent me some stuff. So there's a lot of work already done in different countries we can glean from. The best approach would be for us to, I think, as you said, Kelsey, bring it to the Fire Science Committee, work with the Fire Behavior Analyst Group, the course group, and we'll see where we can go with that. But I think that would be the most appropriate step. And so we'll take responsibility for at least flagging this and looking into what options may be at CIFFC.
Well, with that, I think we're going to open up the discussion to the whole group. So if anyone has any questions or comments, either related to the topics that were brought up or maybe other fire behavior hot topics that you've got on your mind, feel free to post. We've got Matt Corbett's asking whether there was or is an online fire behavior knowledge base.
I have heard of it. I know that FP Innovations was part of developing it at one point. It was called the Fire Behavior Knowledge Database, FBKD. I don't know the status of it at this time, and I don't know who's the caretaker of that at this time, but I know somebody took a stab at this a while ago. I think the original premise was observations of fire behavior in fuel treatment, so in altered fuel types, I think is where that was steering at first. I've been Googling away trying to find a reference to it, and I have not. So Matt, I could follow up with you, see if we can find it, because I'm pretty sure there was a project that we've seen before somewhere.
Yeah, Chris Dallin just commented there was. It used to be a project that CIFFC Fire Science Committee, Mike Watton was involved.
So that one must have fallen off over the past 15 years. It sounds like it started 15 years ago, Dr. Watton says. So I think I'm freezing, so I'm going to put a note in the chat, but that'll be something that we'll follow up with.
You came through clearly to me, Maria. Oh. Yeah, any other questions or comments, either from the audience or the panelists?
I'll go. There's radio silence. Sorry, Tanya, you want to go?
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna put it out there. You three are experienced national level fire behavior analysts. If there was one lesson that you have each learned about fire behavior forecasting that you could pass on to the next generation of FBANs, the new students, the new folks, the new world of fire behavior analysis that's emerging out there, that's full of modeling and nighttime fire behavior and woo-wee and the rest of it. If you could summarize, you know, your key lesson learned, what would you each pass on to them?
I think to be a good fire behavior practitioner, you have to be curious. If you're not curious, you will never learn anything. So be curious, ask yourself questions and why, how, when. Be curious, and then you're gonna learn and go very far in that science.
I think if I were going to pass anything along, it would be understanding your audience and understanding what the fire behavior forecast is for, right? It's for the ground pounders. It's about firefighter safety. And so know your audience and be able to communicate in language that they're going to understand, because you can have this really fancy forecast with all sorts of numbers and it can, research paper type stuff. But if the firefighters don't understand it, or if they can't see themselves in it, then it's really hasn't hit the target.
And for me, I would say it's, like I said during my presentation, it's not about making the predictions in front of the computer. It's getting out there in the field. It's seeing what's happening, catching a flight with the ops if you can, really getting out there, getting dropped off, spending an afternoon ground truthing. Like I said, that depth of burn, that rates of spread if you can. It's really making that prediction in the morning or the night before, and then getting out yourself and seeing if it's holding true.
Great. Those are all great pieces of advice. Thank you.
Kelsey, I'm just going to throw it back to you, because I mean, you've got a lot of years in. What's your piece of advice?
I'm siding with you, Tanya. I really liked what you said about audience. I think that's the first place I would go is listen to your peers. So the science might be telling you one thing, and observations from the field and your peers' experience might be leading you down a different track. So don't discredit what they see and what they think versus what the models and the science is telling you. So I think that would be my advice that I learned the hard way.
Great, yeah, thanks for that question, Kelsey. That was a good one. I don't see any other questions coming into the chat. So I think we'll be wrapping up the conversation now, but thank you for joining us, everybody, and thank you to all the panelists for taking part. That was great. We really appreciate your presentations. And yeah, I guess I'll pass it back to you, Maria, to close things out.
Yeah, nothing much to add on my end. I really enjoyed today's session. I think it's made a really great example of, I think panels are a really great way to go. At least there's a little more conversation. So if you have any feedback, certainly let us know. Contact me or your CIFFC Fire Science Committee rep. If you have any ideas for future conversations, we'd love to hear them. Otherwise, thank you so much. This recording will be on the website, ciffc.ca, and we look forward to seeing you in April. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, see you.
Thank you.